Saturday to all the listeners and all the good folks out there. You're listening to Stone Cold Truth here on the Genesis Communications Network. I'm your host, Tyler Nixon. We will have Roger Stone, the man of the hour, the man of the 2 hours with us later this hour. Roger is at an undisclosed location, I believe somewhere in southern Florida, where he's soaking up the sunshine and plotting his next move. We have a great show ahead for you. Nick Gillespie is going to be on in the second hour. Nick is the editor. He's, I believe, editor-in-chief of Reason.com, a libertarian for sure. Not necessarily a big fan of President Trump and what's some of the current policies that are being enacted by our president. But we here on the Stone Cold Truth believe that the truth has many sides. And in the case of Nick, we'd like to get sort of an alternative viewpoint on. And we're also going to be discussing with Nick marijuana policy and the recent comment by Sean Spicer, which actually we'll be discussing throughout the show. Sean Spicer, the president's spokesman, had said this past week that there would be stepped up, increased enforcement against states which had fully legalized marijuana, had gone to what is called a recreational marijuana versus medical marijuana, of course. It's a big issue. It's a hot issue. It's going to be even bigger because of the thousands upon thousands of jobs and livelihoods that are at stake with this industry, this budding industry, to use a pun. And it really is a liberty issue in the end. And I think rational folks who analyze it and look at what marijuana prohibition, cannabis prohibition really represents in the scheme of our body politic would, I think liberty-minded people would be repelled by it, frankly. It's the kernel of the police state. It really is the core of it, the crux of it. It's very much been a Trojan horse for the establishment of police state policies, as well as, frankly, common law and jurisprudence, where your rights come down to whether you're out and about on the highway or walking. Your rights, to privacy, to not be violated, to have your person be secure, is subject to basically a series of exceptions written by judges. And whether or not you agree with the drug war, that is just not the way America needs to be, and our freedoms need to be secured. If anything, it's quite the opposite of securing our liberties. And we'll certainly get into that more. We also are going to have shortly, actually, in the next segment, Doug Beatty, a good friend of mine going back years. Doug is a libertarian and conservative, somewhat activist, very pro-Second Amendment activist and crusader from back home in Delaware. And Doug happens also to be the son of Ned Beatty, the great actor Ned Beatty, who many of you might remember. If you're probably under 30, you might not know who we're talking about. But if you grew up in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, certainly you know who Ned Beatty was, and his seminal performance in, that's kind of probably not the term to use for his performance, but his great performance in the movie Deliverance, which is very memorable. And he did many movies down the line of great character actor of the 70s. And his son, Doug, who I find very, very witty and concise and amusing. And I worked with him on radio back in Delaware. We're going to have Doug on. He's going to talk a little bit about the marijuana issue and also some what it was like to grow up the son of a very well-known, really almost A-list actor in the 1970s and 80s. Travis Irvine is going to be joining us after that as well. Travis is on a swing through Central America. And that should be certainly interesting. I think he's going to offer some interesting comments on the current policy coming out of the administration with regard to Central America and some of the changes that are in the offing, particularly with the trade agreements. I think with the renegotiation of these trade agreements and Trump's position in handling each of these countries, not through the lens of the Central Intelligence Agency and its muckings about and its meddlings and meanderings, as we've seen for the last half century in Central and to a lesser extent South America and around the world as well. But what happens when we deal directly with these governments and we can deal with the people and their sovereigns rather than through the murky deep state intelligence assets and so forth that really feel, I think, that they are sort of the Praetorian Guard for the American political establishment. They don't really answer to a president. I mean, things we've seen come out in just since President Trump's inauguration have been really disgraceful. A betrayal, I think, of the oaths of office taken by any person who has been involved in any intelligence activities that would use those extraordinary powers for political purposes. Roger Stone, you know, he has been subject to wiretapping and apparently spying of all sorts of and varieties as part of this larger, completely bogus narrative that somehow President Trump is a sort of a, I don't know, I don't want to say a puppet, but he's certainly tied, and that the folks in his campaign are closely tied to Russian intelligence, and, you know, all this sort of murky slapdash charges that have come out, none of which I have yet to see a single shred of hard evidence to demonstrate, much less prove, yet they go on and on. And that is really, let's face it, the modus operandi of the screeching, squealing, rapacious, power-mad left in this country, and perhaps around the world as well, but I think it's really terrible here. They create a massive fog of deceit and distortions and fabrications, and they operate within that, and you can never really straighten things out. I mean, I think the Clintons epitomize this. They would basically confuse an issue to such a degree with so many complexities and so many half-truths and, you know, lies and so forth that, you know, you never could really figure out what in God's name was going on. And it's really, I think, it's a sad time in our country, really. It's a perilous time. And I think the fact of President Trump taking on those forces is a great thing for this country, regardless of what you think of his specific policies on any number of fronts, because we are not well served, folks, having a secret, unaccountable, unelected quasi-government dictating to us and really, frankly, abusing massive, extraordinary powers to target any citizen. I don't care who they are, or how powerful, or how lesser they are. So there you have it. That's my view. And I'm sure Roger can validate this and feels the same way. You know, he will certainly give his opinions on that towards the end of this hour. We're going to have him on. We're going to also be taking your calls. And just to let you know now, the number is 877-300-7645. And you'll be able to call. I'm going to be helping Roger and co-hosting the show moving forward, and it's going to be a good time. I'm going to bring a lot of great topical content and really want to take as many of your calls as we can. We have a limited time every Saturday from 1 to 3 Eastern, and I think, but we want to hear from the people. We want to hear what you have to say, and we want you to be able to be part of this this great show and this great exposition of ideas, and also have, you know, the great guests that Roger Stone is able to bring to the table, and certainly. You know, CPAC's going on right now in Washington. I think the president gave a barn burner of a speech yesterday. He really does not back off. He is not going to back off of what he has laid down as what he wants to do for America, and as far as policies, and I think securing the border, it's real simple. I mean, his statement, President Trump's statement when he was a candidate, Trump, that, you know, we don't have a country. We don't have a country if we don't have borders. And, you know, Nick Gillespie certainly is someone who believes in open borders. He's going to be on again in the 2 o'clock hour, and I really want to get where Nick is coming from. I mean, I think it's nice to have a utopian thought of open borders and, like, you know, let's kumbaya our way around the world and so forth. But when we have a massive welfare state in the offing and a massive unaccountable government, an election system, frankly, that's rife with the potential for fraud with non-citizens, people who are not even citizens of this country being able to go in and vote, how demented, how twisted, how distorted, and how dangerous is that as a reality? You know, it's frightening, and I think what, you know, to secure our borders, to secure the sovereignty of this country, I think is something that, if you don't agree with that, if you don't think that we should have the ability to secure the perimeter of our country, I think we're going. We're gonna get. Sure. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little technical information, folks. We're gonna take a little look at our sponsors. We have a great show coming up for you. Stay tuned. This is Tyler Nixon, Stone Cold Truth. Don't go away.
Stone, New York Times best-selling author.
The Stone Cold Truth rolls on here on Saturday, February 25th, 2017. I'm your host, Tyler Nixon. We will have Roger later in this hour. We will also be taking your calls. Nick Gillespie up in the 2 o'clock hour, as well as Travis Irvine. But right now, I've got a good friend, a fellow former talk show host, and really a crusader for the good and right causes. Doug Beatty is joining me from an undisclosed bunker, I believe, somewhere in the state of Delaware. Doug, can you hear me? Are you with us?
I can hear you fine, Tyler. I'm actually at the undisclosed location looking at the undisclosed fire pit where we pulled the blow everything up with a leaf blower stunt that one time.
Doug is an outdoorsman, my friends. He appreciates a chainsaw, good chainsaw. He has sharpened, I've seen him sharpen a knife to where you could slice easily, like sort of that, just slice right down a piece of paper by holding it in the air and just right through it. And he enjoys the outdoors. And one of the things is take a leaf blower and blow it into a fire pit. And if you've never done that before, try it out, my friends. It's a trip.
You're just shortchanging yourself on the whole fire pit experience, in my opinion. Tyler, it's good to be with you today. And I heard you were talking about hemp and marijuana policy a little bit, and I've got some concerns coming up on that. But I wanted to first get your reaction to, in relationship to the change Spicer's talking about. What do you think the impact will be in states like Colorado?
Well, obviously, it's going to be extremely deleterious, I guess. It's going to be horrible. There's billions of dollars at stake. There are thousands of jobs at stake. And I live in Colorado, and it just amazes me when I hear any politician, any of these, and there are very few activists actually against cannabis or for marijuana prohibition. So it's, you're hard pressed anymore to find anybody who's that delusional who would actually support the policy. Right now, they operate off stasis. They just, the status quo is their buddy, because they don't have to do anything and it's still illegal. It's the folks who want to have sanity and justice in our public policy who have to rise up and change the law by super majorities, which amazes me. You can completely revamp the entire system of our healthcare in this country, and they can, with a straight face, do that and affecting every single American, every single living person, frankly, if you believe the Supreme Court's decision, by virtue of birth, has to be involved with Obamacare, right? Right. But in order to have and acquire a simple natural plant to use for whatever purpose you want, frankly. I mean, I don't think anybody should have to justify why they use it. You have to have like super majorities. You have to have this massive effort across, and it has to be like approaching, as it is now, frankly, 70+% for support for, the medical access to it. And frankly, a majority at minimum approaching 55 to 60% for using it, having it for any reason. So yeah, it would be horrible for Florida. I'm thinking of Stone. It would be horrible for Colorado. It would be horrible for every state that has 28 states so far that have in one form or another made it accessible and legitimized the markets. Took it out of the shadows, took it out of the black market, and made it accessible to Americans for whatever reason without having to justify it. But Doug, I don't want to discuss. I appreciate your asking me the question, but I want to hear what you think. And first of all, you grew up in a Hollywood family full of what did you call them? You were raised by liberal wolves, was it? I forget.
Well, what I like to tell people is I was raised by actors, wolves, liberals, hippies, and communists. Because the actors and wolves were most prominent, but there were definitely hippies, liberals, and communists involved.
Aren't they kind of the same thing, really? I mean, isn't it? No, I'm kidding. We're taking the term liberal. They appear
as one, but then they start shape-shifting when you get them alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, liberal is a term that I think, frankly, I'm really sad that it was adopted into what became, frankly, the collectivist authoritarian left, and they co-opted that word. Now they've moved on to ruin the word progressive, but I think we need to take it back. And those who would say
wolves, hippies, communists and actors are just to soften you up and normalize you for the liberals. That's what that whole progression is about. And that's pretty much like what it was like growing up around the theater. When I lived with my dad most closely, he was actually mostly on stage. And the last place he worked when I was growing up was the Arena Stage in D.C. It was political theater in the round. And it was like that whole activism spreading the message of the 60s theater there.
Right. So, you have a large family. Your father was obviously often acting and on the road a lot. And for those who might not have heard, this is Doug Beatty's dad is Ned Beatty, the actor who, if you grew up or lived in the 1970s, 80s, and early 90s, you knew who Ned Beatty was. He, and most famously, acted in Deliverance, one of the probably more famous.
And that one scene that Vice President Joe Biden admires so much, he keeps referencing it. So yeah, he definitely made an impact on the industry.
Yeah. So did he ever? Let me ask you. I want to hear did he ever discuss the filming of that movie?
Oh, many times. We there were so many things that happened on that movie people don't know about. It was filmed on a shoestring. And the only two established actors, the only really actor there was John Voight. Burt Reynolds was a stunt man. Ronnie Cox and my dad worked together on stage. And everybody else in that movie was a local. The doctor there delivered my half-brother, John, who is now an actor. And the sheriff was James Dickey, the man that wrote the book. So we learned a lot about that movie, and I actually took a trip down that river when I was 21 years old with my dad and Burt Reynolds and a few people that were from the cast of Stroker Ace.
And that's where you appeared in Stroker Ace, am I not mistaken? Which is one of Burt Reynolds' lesser known movies, starring your dad as well.
It was not really a tour de force. I have an uncredited stunt in the first 30 seconds of the movie when you see the car with the wheel missing pulling into the racetrack. I'm the fat guy on the log that does a backward somersault. And it was pretty brilliant, really. And you consider I gave them that level of craft, and they were only paying me $35 a day. I mean, they really got over on that one.
$35 a day to hang out with Burt Reynolds and Ned Beatty and Lonnie Anderson. I think that's. I think people would love to have that opportunity in this lifetime. Well, no, I didn't hang out with Lonnie Anderson, but somebody told the Cluckettes, the Clyde Torkel cheerleaders that were all college cheerleaders, that I could get them into acting. So it was a fun summer. I had lots of running and hiding to do. And you always have fun on a movie set. You forge autographs. I mean, it's just a riot. Doug, you're a veteran, and I know you had some injuries. I just want to real quick, you were in the Navy, but I know you had a terrible motorcycle accident. Sean Spicer talked about opioids and the epidemic, which is absolutely an epidemic. My father was addicted to opioids for practically all of his adult life, and it's a horrible addiction. I know that he implied that marijuana, cannabis, leads to somehow or is associated with opioid addiction, which frankly is absolutely the opposite of the truth. I mean, literally directly opposite. It apparently in states where cannabis has been available for medicinal or recreational purposes, opioid addiction has dropped significantly. Can you talk a little bit about your experience there? Yes, I was injured in a motorcycle accident on December 2nd, 2000, outside Five Guys in Springfield, Virginia. My hip was smashed, and my right leg was mangled. I've had 6 major surgeries, like going under the knife, being asleep, to kind of repair my leg. And as you know, I still walk with a little hitch in my get along and have a few mobility issues. We're running short on time. If you want to, the thing that really got it was I was given OxyContin instead of treatment for an infection. I became addicted, and before it was legal, members of the medical community who will not be named suggested I use cannabis to survive the withdrawals. Yeah, and it worked, right? It did work, yes. I am opioid free. And we actually worked in jobs where I was drug tested for cannabis after that. Didn't have any addiction problems because I wasn't using it. So, Doug Beatty, we're going to have you back again soon on the Stone Cold Truth. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for having me, Tyler. Absolutely. Come back again. Folks, it's just about 1:30. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Stone Cold Truth here on the Genesis Communications Network. I'm your host, Tyler Nixon, and part of what I call the Force, Friends of Roger Stone. That's an elite group who, frankly, includes the President of the United States currently. And here is the man himself joining us. Roger, welcome to your radio show.
Thanks for sitting in. As you know, I'm at the the Association of Political Items Collectors Convention in Palm Beach, Florida. You've never seen so many Nixon and Adlai Stevenson buttons in your entire life.
Amazing. And you have an amazing collection yourself, actually. You want to share a little bit of that for folks? What's your favorite, most precious and rare item?
So that would have to be the Nixon ball. I mean, they made very few of them, kind of a counterculture thing. That presumably was sold at a head shop sometime in the 60s or 70s.
I hear there might be replicas coming out of that, available for all the Nixon stoners out there, right?
Well, which is probably a larger number than either one of us know.
I'm sure, and probably even back then. I know John Dean was probably on some kind of drugs back then, for sure.
John Dean, I watched John Dean the other night on TV talking about the great threats to our democracy that President Donald Trump constitutes. He fails to mention the many times he perjured himself and the complete differences between his testimony under oath to the Watergate special prosecutors and his testimony under oath to the Senate Watergate hearings. Huge discrepancies, enough to be, substantive. Enough for a perjury charge, in fact. Just so the listeners are clear, John Dean is the man who planned, pushed, covered up, and then executed and then covered up the Watergate break-in and then blamed it on others. My book, Tricky Dick, The Rise and Fall and Rise of Richard Nixon, will be out in June, and it details the treachery and duplicitousness of John Dean.
720 pages. It's already available for pre-order at Amazon. And it looks like it's really, it's going to be a great read, I'm sure, Roger. I mean, The Making of the President 2016 is an outstanding book. To all of good folks out there, if you have not gotten this book yet, Making of the President 2016, absolutely rush down to your local bookstore or rush over to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or anywhere and get yourself a copy. It really is having lived through, we all lived through the election, but it takes on a new dimension. It really, you see some of the inside meanderings and sort of wranglings that went on. And from your perspective, Roger, it's really an inside perspective more than anything. President Trump gave a barn burner of a speech yesterday at CPAC. I'm sure you saw that, Roger. Do you have any thoughts on that? So I think we're having a little technical difficulty with Roger.
Yeah, no, you're back. I lost you for a second, but you're back.
Sure.
I haven't had a chance to review the president's speech. I heard he was extremely well received. The CPAC conference is really seminal in the rise of Trump. He goes there in, I guess the first year is 2011. And at the time, he was unaware of what CPAC was. Now it's a tradition that he loves. And at that first speech, I think, really laid out the precepts of Trumpism in terms of trade and immigration and some of the other hot-button issues. But I was very proud of my role in convincing him to go to the first CPAC.
Yeah, you absolutely. I mean, I think I find it interesting, Roger, knowing you as a friend as well as a colleague. I think President Trump, would so benefit from your counsel, and I'm sure you give it to him. But I mean, maybe you don't want to be there. I think he would really benefit from your being right there with him in the White House. But, I think
yesterday I actually reviewed a new staff list of the White House staff, and I must admit, other than Stephen K. Bannon and Reince Priebus, there was not a single name I recognized. I don't know who these people are, but you wonder why the Trump White House leaks like a sieve. Half the people on the White House staff despise Donald Trump and were not for his election. I really think this is dangerous. Rather a snake in the grass than an asp in the bosom, as the Bible says. And the leaking really is extraordinarily disloyal and damaging, frankly, to the president.
It absolutely is. I mean, one of the things growing up, obviously, with the name Nixon was in the 1970s and 80s, a bit of a burden because of just the stigma that had been, so indelibly attached to President Nixon, and wrongfully so in many ways. But they, President Nixon tried to take on the sort of executive branch bureaucracy and so forth. And I always used to hear that sort of the saw that he would be undermined by the people from within, so to speak. But it never really got all, except for, well, of course, John Dean. But in the main, though, he did have a loyal White House staff. But I mean, when you have the president as, other than a couple of handful of people between Jared Kushner, Bannon, as you mentioned, these folks are not loyal to him. In fact, quite the opposite. I mean, I wish really somebody could talk to the president. I don't know what his reasoning is behind it, or if he's just, wanting to take the big picture view. He's mollifying the establishment, at least initially. But, what's the solution to this, Roger? Are we just going to have a Trump presidency constantly rife with quislings, embedded with the asps, as you would have it?
Well, it depends on how things go. I think that, Trump had demonstrated in his business career that he is prepared to make management changes when a business was not doing particularly well. I don't think he's being served particularly well by the team that he has. I did watch this performance with Bannon and Vice Priebus at CPAC. It was like a hostage video. Neither one of those guys was comfortable. They were being forced to say what they were up there talking about. It's frustrating, but it is also not surprising to me. In all honesty, the president's focused on some big picture issues like immigration, like infrastructure, and I don't think he's too focused on who some of the third deputy assistants are at the White House. But look, so far so good. The key thing is to stay on the agenda. I think there's going to be more and more grumbling at the grassroots about the fact that the Trump administration does not include any Trump people. There's some incredibly able people who have been passed by when preference was given to Republican National Committee alum who could prove that they never supported Donald Trump. I think that's how you get on the payroll. I'm joking, obviously, but it is unfortunate that you had a situation in which this split division between Trump people and regulars continues. Let's see how it plays out. On another subject, Tyler, I gave an interview to Fox, the Fox affiliate in Florida, when I learned that it is probable that the FISA court approved a secret warrant into all of my email, phone calls, text messages well over a year ago. On the one hand, this is an outrageous violation of privacy.
Absolutely.
As you know, you don't even have to present any evidence to the judges of the FISA court.
Right.
You just have to ask to violate the civil liberties of any citizen, and 90% of those requests are approved.
Roger, we're up against our break time here. Well, let's carry this over to the next segment for sure. I really want to get into this because it's just absolute insanity, and you have no recourse, really. I mean, under the law. So you're listening.
I'll sit tight.
All right. You're listening to Roger Stone and Tyler Nixon.
Individuals and business.
Alex Jones was trying to reach me last night.
Roger Stone is a very interesting guy.
Sure is. American political prophet, as I've said before. You're listening to Stone Cold Truth here on the Genesis Communications Network. I'm your host, Tyler Nixon, for this weekend. And of course, the master of ceremonies, the man who, after whom Stone Cold Truth is named, Roger Stone, is with us, joining us from South Florida, from the American Political Memorabilia Convention. Is it, Roger? Something like that?
the Association of Political Items Collectors. They have regional shows, and their South Florida regional show is today. It's a passion of mine. Not as active as I once was, but if you're into political memorabilia, I highly recommend you sign up in the association. You can find us on Facebook, or you can find the website for the organization. It's the Association of Political Items Collectors, APIC.
Are you going to be signing books down there, Making the President in 2016 by chance?
No, I'm trading signed books for political items. So far, it's worked out great.
That's a good bargain there. What's the best
barter? There's a lot of barter here. Speaking of the Making the President 2016, I was disappointed last week to see that the number 14 and 15 book on the New York Times bestseller list, for which there are 15 slots, the Nielsen book scan number for the 14 and 15 number books is substantially lower than the Nielsen book scan number for the Making of the President. Since that constitutes about 80% of the book sales in the country for that week, it is almost mathematically impossible for my book not to have made the list in terms of sales. Not that the New York Times book section is above playing games, but one has to wonder.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I would recommend, again, to anybody listening to get this book. It is really a great redux. It will stand in history as, I think, the definitive account of this election, and also brings in your background with Donald Trump. But we're touching on it at the end of the last segment. In the midst of the campaign last summer, apparently at some point you became the subject of a government, FISA order for wiretaps and just basically completely invading your life and your privacy unbeknownst to you, and for which you really have no recourse at this point that we know of. I'll certainly be looking into finding out as an attorney what we could do, what your options are. But Roger, what was your reaction when you heard this? I mean, I would have been floored personally.
Well, on the one hand, I was angry because nobody wants, the government reading all their emails between them and their wife or them and their associates. There's a lot of personal information. On the other hand, a review of all my communications for the entire year will show that I never had any contact with the Russians. Then I can start filing, defamation lawsuits against those who've insisted that I did. At the end of the day, this is going to prove that this is a witch hunt, that this is the new McCarthyism. And I'm sorry, but I just don't believe there is any Russian influence in the Trump campaign. Certainly none as far as I personally am concerned. I had no contacts with the Russians or any Russian entity or anyone fronting for the Russians during this period. This is a canard, a falsehood, and I think it's designed to destabilize our new president.
I think it also exposes exactly, amongst other issues, the utter hypocrisy of the screeching, squealing, rapacious authoritarian left in this country, who were all about protesting President Bush's, implementation of these particular types of policies, the secret courts and the FISA courts, and the wiretapping and the intrusive, in their minds, what would typically be civil libertarian type issues or complaints against it. They were all against, just like they were against the war. Until it becomes to their advantage, until it becomes their policy, and in which case they're just happy to jump on and grab all this leaked information and the fact of the wiretaps themselves is enough in their minds, as I've seen plenty of people argue. It's just the fact that it exists. It's just they're convicted you're convicted, in their minds, and I think it's. I wish President Trump would really embrace more of a civil libertarian mindset with regard to this. I'm sure Nick Gillespie in the next hour will have something to say about it. But the fact that you can wiretap American citizens and can spy on American citizens to this extent, and they have no recourse whatsoever, even after it's been discovered and leaked, it's absurd.
The surveillance of General Flynn. Why were the Obama holdovers at the CIA? Or at the FBI, because it would be domestic. Why were they Why did they have a U.S. citizen who was an appointee as the president's national security advisor under surveillance? In all honesty, the president needs to call in the director of the FBI and say, find the leaker or you, sir, are fired. Find the leaker or I've lost confidence in you and your whole front line of management of the FBI and replace everybody. This is the second level Obama people at the Central Intelligence Agency and at the FBI. These people are a cancer. They need to be rooted out, prosecuted, and sent to prison for these leaks. Just leaking that there was a FISA warrant approved is a felony. That's a felony in itself. Leaking that General Flynn was under surveillance, that's a felony in itself. So, no person is above the law. Isn't that what they said in Watergate?
Oh, yeah.
No person's above the law. I mean, the sooner the president figures out that the intelligence agencies are stacked with people who are quislings, who are opponents, and cleans house, the better off he will be. Jimmy Carter did it, had to do it. John Kennedy, as you know, vowed to do it, probably played some substantial role in his murder.
It's the fact of these. What I think is truly disturbing is that there's no one. You have to have a whistleblower essentially, and you look at what they do with the whistleblowers who would expose this type of stuff. But institutionally, there's no real. I don't think push or mechanism or a sense within any of these intelligence organizations that like, hey, when this happens, we really need to rein ourselves in. We need to reform this. No, they will never give up these powers that they've been granted. And frankly, I don't know how many they've actually been granted. I think if you look at what they've been granted, triple that. And by an exponent of 2 as far as how far they're willing to go, I think they're when it comes to spying on Americans, I guarantee their motto is, we'll ask forgiveness rather than permission. And
well, in fact, that is the pattern. What happens is they get caught with excesses. The director gets pulled in front of Congress. He testifies and promises it'll never happen again. Of course, then it does. Seriously, I think, and I was on MSNBC the other night, and I was challenged on my claim that former CIA Director John Brennan converted to Wahhabism. Now that I've been challenged, I have no choice but to make sure it's proven. I will prove before the end of the Trump administration that he is a traitor and he will be prosecuted. Mark my words. He actually did the Hajj, which is, where essentially Muslims take an oath that they're allowed to lie or steal or cheat as long as it is benefiting Allah. This is the only religion, quote unquote, that countenances dishonesty.
And murder in some cases.
Honesty and integrity is a bedrock of every religion, but not Islam.
It's interesting. I personally feel that. And this is where I just wish President Trump again would have folks around him who are ruthless in rooting out this stuff. Number one. Number two, I guarantee you, Roger, and I'm sure you would concur, this is the tip of the iceberg, the spying on you, the spying on, frankly, the presidential conversations to foreign leaders that were leaked. I guarantee you that the Obama administration, certainly probably the Clinton ooze, absolutely abused and probably have third-tier intelligence folks who they, could rely on who were compromised, that they could get access to anybody's emails and conversations, whoever they wanted, whatever they wanted. I guarantee you that it has been abused to the point it would probably just boggle the mind of the average American with outrage. The fact that you were part of a warrant that I think it was such a high level and so high profile that they had to eventually come out and say that there was a warrant involved. But I bet you there's a lot of spying that goes on, and I bet you Obama was wrapped up in it just as much as the rest.
For all I know, the president himself was reading the intercepts on Donald Trump.
Wouldn't surprise me.
My suspect is that they had him under surveillance. No, we have a rogue agency here that has no commitment to the law. Yep. And the sooner the president figures out that he needs to clean house at the agency, the better off he's going to be.
Amen. Roger Stone. I'm part of the Force Friends of Roger Stone. This is Stone Cold Truth Radio. Roger, great to hear from you. We'll look forward to a full show next week with you.
I I will be back next week. I appreciate your sitting in for us. We definitely want to get into Sean Spicer's comments about legal marijuana.
We will. The Stone Cold Truth rolls on. We are live here on this warm in Denver anyway, Saturday afternoon. Joining me, Nick Gillespie of Reason.com, who I would call a libertarian Zen master, a good friend, a good man, who differs quite a bit with the Trump administration, and it would be accurately dubbed a critic of the president and many of the policies that are being enacted currently. Nick, welcome to Stone Cold Truth. Oh, okay. We don't have Nick on the line yet. I'm sorry, folks. Nick Gillespie is, he's been at Reason.com for many years and really has, Reason is the font of libertarian thought. I think it's the place to go where that thought coalesces. And I agree. I consider myself small L libertarian, absolutely, for sure. Liberty is where it's at. It is absolutely why our country was founded. Individual liberty. I don't believe in this sort of collectivism, which leads to authoritarianism and leads to control and coercion, which is really, unfortunately, what we have as the animus of our government at the top level and on down to even the local level. What I would call little big brother, if you've ever lived in some of these municipalities run exclusively by the Democrat Party, you certainly know that they can be oppressive, coercive, and just outright thieves, frankly. And they're unaccountable, and the electoral system can't seem to get rid of them. They dupe the local citizenry or pay off, aspects or portions of it effectively with goodies and freebies while they ride atop it. I come from a town, Wilmington, Delaware, which in Biden country, which is absolutely the epitome of this sort of, I think, just institutionalized corruption, where they cannot grab enough of the citizenry's resources and oppress them enough with books after books, page after page of regulations and ordinances and commands and dictates and taxes and fines and fees and penalties. And this is, of course, in addition to what you get often at the county level, at the state level, and of course the federal level. We really have a giant government complex in this country, which, from the top down to the local level, where you can't escape it. You really have to just live out in the wilderness, frankly, to have any true freedom. And even then, I'm sure there's something you're doing out there that would be against the law if you try to supply yourself and survive out there. It's really I think we've reached a point in the history of this country that is. I would hope, and unfortunately we're really, I think, distracted by the Sturm and Drang of the authoritarian left, which has risen up to defend, I guess, this monstrous big government that they, think is the answer to their prayers that was going to bring us all to utopia. And it's quite the opposite, really. I mean, it's for those who support the massive government combine that rules this country to go out and call those who oppose it fascists is like truly one of the most intellectually dishonest, false, and projection like narratives that you can imagine. I mean, for National Socialists, which is what they are, to call others fascist is really rich, frankly. And, I think as soon as we get Nick on here, and I'm sure he'll be on any minute, if you're a libertarian, I think, unfortunately, you run into, obviously, run afoul of what are the basic core of what a government needs to do in terms of, I think, secure in this world, in this rough and tumble world where we do truly have enemies. We have people who do want to obliterate us, to wipe us off the face of the earth, who want to corrupt us, who want to defile our way of life and intrude in on our on our freedoms in one way or another. But the bottom line, though, is that we shouldn't become that in order to defeat that. And I think that's where the national government in America really has major issues with what it does. I mean, the national security police state, we just heard Roger talk about the FISA warrant that was approved to wiretap him that has now come to light. It's supposed to be all secret. It really is disgraceful. And I think the powers are so extraordinary that no person can, no person's immune from it. It's really scary. It's Orwellian. It's Big Brother. And I really hope that someday in this country, before at least my life ends, that we will see a more of a return to liberty. And, speaking of liberty, we do have Nick now on the line with us, Nick Gillespie of Reason.com. Welcome to Stone Cold Truth.
Thanks for having me. Sorry about the mix-up. I thought I was getting the call, and I need to make the call. Just imagine if we were a federal police force trying to enforce marijuana laws, in states that have legalized it for recreational or medical use, that would be quite a screw up. But
well, the whole thing's a screw up. The fact that a natural plant. I mean, it boggles my mind, Nick, the more I kind of wrap my head around it with like a rational basis test. A plant, this is for, if you're religious at all, which I'm sure, we get a lot of folks who are faith people who support these types of policies. It boggles my mind that they would reconcile this with Christianity, certainly, that they could not only deny folks the access to a God-given ameliorative plant, it's natural, fully natural, but also that would cage human beings over it. What do you think of Spicer's comments, Sean Spicer's? Oh, go ahead.
Well, they're truly repellent, and to the extent that they accurately reflect the priorities of the Trump administration, particularly Jeff Sessions at the Department of Justice, going after states that have legalized recreational pot, it's very disconcerting, although it's fully in line with Jeff Sessions' long history of going after people who smoke pot. And let me give you 3 quick reasons why I think it's a huge mistake, apart from any kind of moral considerations. And with you, I'm there, nobody should be caged over wanting to smoke a joint rather than drinking a martini. If you're driving while impaired, that's one thing. If you're beating people up or committing crime under the influence, that's one thing. But, we're just talking about mild intoxicants here. I don't think there's a moral case against one intoxicant over another, but from purely pragmatic grounds, this is wildly unpopular. The most recent Quinnipiac poll, looking at just Republicans, only 35% wanted to legalize pot, but 55% opposed the federal government getting involved in states that have legalized pot for recreational use. So it's unpopular. It is against the Republicans' philosophy of federalism, of letting the states be laboratories of experiment. Let Colorado, let Washington, let Oregon, let California, let a couple of other states legalize recreational pot and see how it plays out. If it's a disaster, it's something the state will take care of and the voters in that state will take care of. If it's successful, it will be adopted and modified and kind of altered to individual states' conditions and their populace. So, and that's what the Republicans are constantly talking about, except when it gets in the way of them getting what they want at the national level. And then the other thing is, Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions certainly is talking about, we want more civil asset forfeiture. We want to police the borders more. We want to go after this and that other type of category. They're already spread thin. The lowest possible priority should be going after states that have legalized recreational marijuana. In Colorado, it has been nothing but a boon to state coffers. It could also be a boon to federal coffers if they would actually allow and just tax and regulate pot as they do beer, wine, and alcohol. It would be a better world. It would be a freer world. It would be, I would argue it would be a more Republican world if we take the Republican Party at this face value of what they constantly are talking about, being independent and being able to make choices in our lives.
Nick, hold that thought. We're going to carry you over to the next segment. Brilliant comments as always, I think. You're listening to the Stone Cold Truth here on Genesis Communications Network with Tyler Nixon, and we have Nick Gillespie. Don't go away. And we're back here on the Stone Cold Truth. I'm your host, Tyler Nixon. Roger Stone is at a political memorabilia convention in Florida, bartering expanding his collection. And we have on the line with us a great American and a good friend, Nick Gillespie of Reason.com. We were just discussing the marijuana policy across the United States, the federal policy, which many of us very, very much hoped President Trump would stick to what his original, very scant, although scant claims or position statements were during the campaign, which is that it should be left to the states and federalism, as you mentioned, Nick. And, I was struck by the thought as you were running through, sort of the litany of reasons why this federal policy is absurd, from federalism to the fact of the popularity even in the Republican Party for letting, local jurisdictions and states decide their own fate. But, I don't think it really comes down anymore to people opposing or those who oppose. And by the way, it's really a matter of stasis more than anything. It's just the status quo serves them, so they can just kind of, lightly defend it, and they don't have to really make the case ever. But more than the fact of people getting, quote, high or intoxicated, which marijuana exists whether it's illegal or not, and people are using it. Right. So it's like absurd to think that because it's illegal, it doesn't occur. We know it occurs, and the society runs along just fine with with people using it. But I think it really has to do, Nick, and I'd like you to comment on this, with the control mechanisms that have grown up around it. I think that it has become a Trojan horse for the destruction of civil liberties and, frankly, many of the rights enshrined in the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And in fact, there is a fantastic book that came out in 2016 called The War on Alcohol by a Harvard historian named Lisa McGeer, which makes that exact point in a graphic and, absolutely irrefutable detail, which is that the war on alcohol, Prohibition, was the time when, for the first time in American history, federal police or federal law enforcement mechanisms got federalized in order to deal with Prohibition. At the end of Prohibition, many of the same people who were involved in Prohibition merely switched over to drugs, and that included narcotics like cocaine and opioids, but especially marijuana. And that was the point. She makes the case that the whole kind of massive imprisonment state, the penitentiary state, the carceral state, is, as she puts it, it was rooted in the shift from alcohol prohibition, which boosted federal prison populations and had all different states creating prison complexes. It switched into the war on drugs, which started to be prosecuted very, very heavily in the wake of Prohibition at the state level and especially at the federal level. And you saw that again. It kicked in after World War II again. Nixon, and this is a place where I think, our good friend Roger Stone has mixed loyalties. Nixon used a revamped war on drugs as a way of kind of policing more and more people and more activities from the federal level. And I think Reagan did the same thing. And it would be, and Clinton did the same thing. Clinton prosecuted the war on drugs worse than anybody. Obama was no great shakes on it. It would be wrong in the 21st century to see somebody like Donald Trump, who knows better, to actually continue in this policy and to go along with Jeff Sessions' idea that, we really need to be policing and regulating marijuana, particularly in states that have already taken it on themselves to legalize it and regulate it.
Yeah, not 17 years ago, I believe it is, and Roger Stone would attest to this. Donald Trump called the war on drugs a failure, an outright failure, or maybe it was 1988. It was either 88 or 2000, but he previously expressed absolute incredulity with regard to it, and I think. Unfortunately, he's evolved to where he is taking sort of a non-position. I don't think he's taken any strong position. I would hope when it comes time for him to weigh in as president that he would come down on the side of individual liberty. I think, unfortunately, the law enforcement industrial complex in this country has taken the war on drugs, upon itself as their sort of crusade. And it really does them a disservice, frankly, and it really does a disservice for the frontline servants, public servants who are, the police, basically the guys who have to deal with this on the street, because it creates this violent, dangerous black market, which they then have to go in and interdict, and it really creates contempt and disrespect for what should be folks who we can look to protect, the public safety, and who are really, I think, in most cases, want to serve and want to help people and want to protect life and property. And it's just,
I don't think there certainly not a local or state level police department that is excited about prosecuting people for marijuana, or even, I mean, like some of them, the bad eggs will use it as a way, like, most states have decriminalized small amounts of pot, but you can still get around that. You can still arrest people and harass them. You can claim if it's more than a few grams in many places that, it's intent to distribute. So we're looking at a drug kingpin or, et cetera. But most cops and most state police will tell you, this is a waste of time, resources. And I think, most important, what you were saying is that it undermines respect for the law, because everybody and their grandmother at this point knows that, if pot were legalized, it would be, you could have a bud, you could have a Bud Light, you could have, marijuana, you could have a light marijuana or a heavy marijuana, you could have liquor and alcohol and other types of intoxicants. And, the question isn't whether or not people can get a buzz on, it's whether or not they should be allowed to operate heavy machinery or, run subway trains while doped up or drunk. And it's like everybody agrees no. So let's get on with that. Let's get on with observable behavior that causes a public health problem or a menace to public safety. And let's get out of, trying to keep people from, as you were saying, kind of cultivate a natural plant that has been around for thousands of years, has not been eradicated by the war on pot since the mid-'30s, that started with the Marijuana Tax Act. It's like, for God's sakes, we're in the 21st century. We can leave behind some childish things from the 20th century, and certainly the war on pot, which Jeff Sessions and Sean Spicer are promising. God, we've grown up as a society. We should be dealing with more serious issues.
Frankly, we were more advanced and more enlightened in the 18th century than we are in the advent of the 21st century on this issue. Jacob Sullum, your esteemed colleague, a great man, wrote the book "Saying Yes in Defense of Drug Use," and it's not a paean to getting high or getting, but he goes through the entire history of the use of intoxicants or all this and so forth, and it's rife throughout the Bible. It's whether it be alcohol and the fact of the use of hemp alone, the fact that we cannot avail ourselves of this agricultural commodity because of the war on drugs, and it is not even psychoactive, which is the insane part of it, is absolutely counterproductive.
I totally agree. And one of the things that's nice is that you do have people like Rand Paul in Kentucky, which is a big pot-growing state, but it could also be a fantastic hemp-growing state. And Thomas Massey, who's also from Kentucky in the House of Representatives, they've gotten people like Mitch McConnell to start moving towards at the very least, federal pilot programs to allow the growing of non-psycho hemp, which is by definition non-psychoactive. But these are states that have been hollowed out. Like for all the talk about we're going to let coal miners go back into the mines, like you don't need as many coal miners as you did 50 years ago because machines do that better, and it's horrible work. Why not create a hemp industry, a domestic hemp industry, which is currently is illegal, instead of importing hemp fabric from overseas? This is the way we can bring jobs back to America that people would like to do that have a future. Build hemp, grow hemp and grow.
Nick, I hate to cut you off. We got to wrap it up, but you're absolutely right. Jobs. That's where it's at. Nick Gillespie, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to have you back again soon.
Roger Stone, New York Times best-selling author, brings you.
I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
That Donald J. Trump has been selected as the Republican Party nominee for President of the United States.
And I promise you that I will not let you down. We will do a great job. We will do a great job. And I can only say that while the campaign is over, our work on this movement is now really just beginning.
The Making of the President 2016. How Donald Trump orchestrated a revolution. Find out more at stonecoldtruth.com. stonecoldtruth.com.
Welcome back to the Stone Cold Truth on the Genesis Communications Network, named after our good friend Roger Stone. And Roger is at a political memorabilia convention this weekend, and we'll be back for the full show next week. So you're going to want to tune into that. We're going to have some more excellent guests joining us, and of course, topical discussion. And I'm hoping we can maybe take some more phone calls. It seems like the 2 hours, blows by pretty quickly. And I used to do a 4-hour show every Saturday back in Delaware, and I love taking calls all day long. So, and I'm sure many of you out there listening would love to have a chance to call in. So we're going to try to work some more call-ins in future shows. Joining us now from always an undisclosed location, as any member of what I call the Force Friends of Roger Stone we're always in undisclosed locations, is Travis Irvine, a great comic, a comedian, and now world traveler. Welcome to the Stone Cold Truth, Travis.
Tyler, thanks so much for having me. Always good to be with you, and you're doing a great job today. I've been listening to the whole show down here in Grenada, Nicaragua, one of the older cities in Central America, and great show as always.
I appreciate that. So, did you say hi to Daniel Ortega for us?
No, that is a different country, Tyler. Goodness sake.
So, well, listen, we were touching on it. You're a younger guy than obviously Stone and myself. You're around 30, right? And not to make you disclose your age, but is that right?
Yeah, I am. I've been 30 for 3 years now, so that's how I like to.
So you're like the Jack Benny of millennials, then, I say. For those who, I'm sure the older listeners, Jack Benny, perpetually 39. So, listen, I wanted to, you definitely are a tapped in guy on social media. You travel around the country. You do your show, your stand up act, and the marijuana issue. I think I just don't understand why there aren't people in the Trump administration who can see, they can read polls. Amongst millennials, the support for the decriminalization, whatever you want to call it, the liberation, I would call it, of hemp and marijuana, cannabis, the cannabis plant generally, is like off the charts. I mean, it's literally like ultra super majorities. You're into like 75 and 80%. And I truly believe that if the Trump administration were to say, you know what, we are going to stick with federalism, we are going to be hands off and frankly support legislation to just remove it completely from the federal purview, get it off the Controlled Substances Act schedule list completely. And I think Trump would absolutely have a ton of converts because he lived up to his promise, for starters. Many millennials outright state that they thought when he said leave it to the states that he meant it, and that effectively means, for a place like where I live, Colorado, legalization or decriminalization, whatever. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, you talk to people. I mean, give us your wisdom, Travis. Your 33 1/3 wisdom.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a no-brainer issue for millennials, like you said. I would even say it goes beyond millennials. I think it's, last polling I saw, was 60-70% of the country marijuana should be and essentially regulated like alcohol by the states. I mean, I know Roger and I have talked how, they're in places like Florida and Nevada in the election in 2016 where marijuana or recreational marijuana was on the ballot, more people actually voted for or against that than voted for president, meaning they went into the voting booth to vote for the legalization of medical or recreational marijuana and left president blank. I mean, the issue is so popular right now.
It's a presidential undervote.
The issue, exactly. I mean, the issue is so popular right now. It makes no sense to me. As you said, candidates seemed to hint that he would leave this issue up to the states. I'm down here with a group called Comedy Abroad. You can go to comedyabroad.com to learn more about them. A bunch of great comics from Canada. Canada, marijuana is not an issue anymore. It seems counterproductive to go back in time on this issue. And you got to wonder who's getting to Trump about turning back the clock here, whether it's Jeff Sessions, who I would never want to party with. Yeah, I've met him once. He seems like a cordial guy, but I would not want to go to a party with him. Or if it's a guy like Chris Christie, who vowed to crack down on regulating or essentially crack down on states marijuana. And Chris Christie is the guy I'd never invite to a marijuana party because he wouldn't partake and he'd just eat everybody's snacks.
Yeah, everybody gets the munchies, goes to satisfy them, and Christie's already cleaned out the fridge, huh? Yeah, I could see that. Christie is particularly, to me, pernicious. He really is. He represents. It's sad. He held up the implementation of medical cannabis in New Jersey for years, and it's like even when you have, I just don't get it. You have voter will, you have popular support. It's like, what is with these politicians? What is with these people? Like, there's no more clear issue, I think, that why are you thwarting the will of the people? Like, I'm not all about, Democrat majorities should rule the world and tell us what to do, but this is a liberty issue. This is like people are voting to liberate, others, their fellow citizens from the yoke of being criminals, being classified as criminals for possessing, much less using, a mere plant. It's crazy, Travis.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you know about New Jersey, it's actually one of the worst implemented medical marijuana states. I think they had figured out a way to make only 4 dispensaries in the entire state for them for patients who actually get their medicine. And I recall Chris Christie having another one of his famous disputes with a citizen of New Jersey, essentially a father whose child benefited from hemp-created medicine, marijuana-created medicine, and this father had to go and face Chris Christie face-to-face to take on this issue. And Chris Christie, of course, did his usual, kind of big blowhard, didn't really care.
I remember that.
And that and that tended to be the outcome of it. It's like you said, the clock is turning on this issue. The states are taking it upon themselves. It makes no sense to me that a conservative, even if you look at it from a conservative standpoint, why does it make sense to waste billions of dollars on enforcing something as irrelevant as this when you could be essentially allowing private businesses to make billions of dollars? And let's look at your state in Colorado, billions of dollars for the state that then they plug into good causes like education. It seems like a real no-brainer, and I don't know. I'm hoping Sean Spicer, maybe he's just high and talking out of his.
Yeah. I think he was his comments. I don't think President Trump has really weighed in on this at all. I think he on this issue, as with some others, I think he wants to hang back, and then when he makes a decision, it will be absolutely, I'm sure, affirmative, or will be not absolute, but you know what I mean. He will be convincing in terms of what his decision is. I'm just hoping he lets maybe folks, puts this may be a trial balloon to put out there, because he's trying to somewhat mollify, I think, the more mouth breathing elements, I think, what I would call them, frankly, I don't know who these folks are. I mean, I think it's really just an older generation who has been sort of, I don't want to use the term brainwash, but I mean, frankly, the science on it is absolutely convincing, and frankly, just the pure statistics, as I've said, I think it's like, tens of millions of people use this substance on a daily basis, one form or another. It's being used to tamp down epileptic seizures, from that to chronic pain. I mean, everything you can think of. And I just think that folks have been fed so much of the reefer madness drug war propaganda that they're just kind of dug into that position. But, I think ultimately it does come down to the control freak mindset, as well as, let's face it, there's a lot of people employed in the, DEA and other places who benefit from it. And that's really sad. Prison guards were one of the top lobbies for, opposing liberalization of marijuana laws in California. I mean, what's that tell you? Like, people literally want to see people in prison for nonviolent offenses in order that they would have jobs. It's scary and sad. Travis, we're going to hold you over for another segment, actually. So, stay with us. You all are listening to Stone Cold Truth Radio here on the Genesis Communications Network. I'm Tyler Nixon, your host. Do not go away. And we are back for the final segment of Stone Cold Truth here on the Genesis Communications Network. On the line with me from Nicaragua, you said. What was the name of the town, Travis? Irvine?
The name of the city is Granada. It's one of the oldest cities in Central America. Yeah, Granada, Nicaragua.
So you've hit a few. What countries have you hit? Give us a little quick triptych.
Basically, right now I'm on tour with a great group called Comedy Abroad. You can learn more about them at comedyabroad.com. And we are doing comedy shows to raise money for local. These nonprofits are just helping children in the rural areas, and it's a great cause. It's essentially a way for a dumb comedian like me to raise money from expats who live in the area. Costa Rica is one of the largest expat population of Americans living there. So we did some shows there, and now we've been doing some shows here in Nicaragua. If any of your listeners happen to be in Granada, Nicaragua, they are certainly welcome to come to our show tomorrow night at O'Reilly's Irish Pub. It doesn't get more Nicaraguan than O'Reilly's Irish Pub, but it's really encouraging to see how many Americans are here. They're living, and really the two cultures have assimilated. Costa Rica is one of the safest countries in Southwest, the second, and from here we'll be going on into Mexico. And I'm really excited to be here for the cause and way to kind of show how Americans can indeed help the local causes here in Central America.
You heard they're building a wall, right? So you might want to, get, skedaddle back here. when you get to Mexico. Course. Now, let me ask you this. I traveled to Mexico a handful of times years ago. I think mostly pre 9/11. Really just across the border into Tijuana, just on just sort of like a little day trip, just to check it out one time when was hanging in Southern California.
Yes.
I personally
I've done the Tijuana. I've done the Tijuana trip myself. It was not a day hang though; it was an all-night hang, and I'm very glad we made it back in one piece.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. Like, I honestly, and thank you, drug war. I would have considered going to Mexico in previous years. I absolutely would not travel to Mexico under any circumstance at this point. I hate to say it. I mean, it's just, to me, the risk is there. And I'm sure there's areas of the country that are perfectly safe, but I mean, I feel like you'd be a target as an American. And I mean, do you have any trepidation there? Do you feel like you're going to places that, you feel totally secured and comfortable?
Yeah. In fact, I mean, I think there's a lot of misnomers about Central America and the safety here. Essentially, if you are a gringo, there is some assumptions that you have money, but I don't. We have not had any problems with crime or burglaries or anything like that. If you have money, if anything, a lot of people here just at their store or on the things that they're selling. So, we're not getting accosted by people, but when you're walking around the town square in Granada, people will come up to you, they'll approach you, they'll try to sell you things. And beyond that, we have not, again, we're in Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Mexico. These are relatively, very safe places in Central America. The worst places right now are places like Honduras, who, that country obviously had yet another coup, of course, which was supported by then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in 2009. That has destabilized that country, made it very unsafe. The crime from there has gone over to El Salvador. The murder rates in El Salvador are very high. Guatemala is also having problems. And really, you look at the history, this is another interesting libertarians kind of at least line up with the logic of then candidate Trump, that we shouldn't be entangling ourselves in regime changes with civil wars and things like that. The same way Trump opposed Iraq, and created a lot of messes in the Middle East. When we do these coups in Central America, that's what destabilizes the area, makes people poorer and less safe, and makes the areas less safe. So I do think there's some misnomers about the safety and security situation in Central America. And really, I think if they came down here, they'd have a great time.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the history of the CIA meddlings. You had in the 1950s, post World War II, there was a need to secure petroleum resources, so there were meddlings in Middle Eastern countries, and then that sort of shifted towards Southeast Asia once we kind of nailed down our positions there, and the big sisters or whatever they're called, the big oil companies had secured their positions in the Middle East. Then we were in Vietnam. It was okay. Well, now we got to get into Asia. We got to meddle there. Korea had been somewhat of a sort of in the background, but we kind of smartly got the hell out of there, with our skin still on, and then moved into Vietnam. And then Vietnam obviously, dragged on for years. A lot of war profiteers got rich, and a lot of good soldiers died. I'm a former Army infantryman. I served in the Gulf War era. Then we moved into Central America. You notice it's funny how all suddenly Central America became a big deal right after Vietnam. Like that was the next target area. And I just, it's very sad the effects when we go in and try to destabilize and control these foreign, countries and regimes. And I'm sure there's a lot of fallout still, devastating effects from our involvement in Central America. Of course, it is true, though, that, Fidel Castro attempted to meddle as well and to, spread communism throughout. I think probably of all places, there is some Central America was one of the areas where, I don't know about regime change and manipulating them, but certainly we should have been, pushing democracy. And I think there's ways to do that without, sending the CIA in. But, have you seen anything? What's the worst thing you've seen? Besides poverty, has there been anything that really disturbed you in your swing through there, or has it been all good?
It's been all pleasant. Again, Costa Rica has a huge expat population. Nicaragua is actually installing a lot of tax incentives, trying to get Americans, Canadians, and Europeans to retire here as well. They're essentially using the same incentives Costa Rica used in the 1980s to attract the tens of thousands of expats that currently live there. So, beyond the POSTEM, the rural areas, and these people are happy. They're just kind of living in poverty, like you said. We haven't really encountered anything dangerous of that sort. You did make a good point, though. I mean, even they tell us what countries are more dangerous in Central America, and that, again, it goes to Honduras and Panama, places where, I'm looking at a list of, as you mentioned it, CIA coups that they're involved in, Guatemala in 1963 and 2000, Panama, of course, in 1989. So there seems to be
Chile?
a very close...
That's South America.
Chile, well, that's South America, but there is a very close relation to countries that the CIA had a hand in starting coups and destabilizing, and places that even people here in Nicaragua and Costa Rica will say, oh yeah, that country is much less safe. You guys shouldn't go there. And just to bring it full circle, Tyler, you mentioned not wanting to go to Mexico yourself, but I think we have to also be honest here about the drug war. And if the United States just legalized not just pot, but all drugs, essentially, as pure libertarians do believe, that would stop the drug cartels and their reign of crime and terror in Mexico and other places in Central America. I mean, that would wipe them out. You take away their business, you take away from the black market, and you're essentially putting it into a legal business, as we see with the cannabis industry in the States. So that's the reason why Mexico comes off as so dangerous in certain areas, is because the drug cartels have been given a carte blanche because with it completely in the dark.
I'm with you there 100%, Travis. It's really disturbing to me. You have, I think it's approaching now, since they really ramped up their drug war activities in 2006, 100,000 people have been butchered, whether it be with, in shootouts with police, but mostly by these pernicious, horrifying, huge now criminal organizations, these drug cartels, who have profited absolutely. I mean, no one loves prohibition better, frankly, than the mafia. And what we have in these cartels is our modern day mafia, and to the tunes of billions of dollars. And you could be opposed to every drug known to mankind. Nobody should do anything, and still admit that prohibition does not work. It simply does not work. It's absolutely, and the prohibition is worse than the effects of any drugs themselves in terms of societal impact and collapse. Travis, I want to really thank you for making the effort to reach out and be on the show from such a far-flung location.
Hey, Hey, thanks so much for having me as always. And, you know, as dark as our topics get, I do thank you guys, and I hope everyone can come out to our comedy shows, comedyabroad.com. You can learn all about it.
Great. Safe travels. We'll see you soon, my friend.